A guest was expected, but he never arrived. Why? Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your voices make this mystery come alive. It had been raining since late afternoon, the sort of steady, resigned rain that seemed to understand Paris and be understood by it. On Boulevard Richard Lenoir, the plane trees had turned black, and on the pavement the spill of light from the street lamps deepened the puddles, where a thin scum of oil gathered in iridescent rings. Inside the apartment, the steam from Madame Maigret's pot on the stove hung under the ceiling in a trembling veil, and there was the domestic clink of a lid, set down too firmly, the muffled tap of a wooden spoon on enamel chief inspector. Maigret sat by the window with his pipe cooling between his fingers. He wasn't thinking exactly. A better word was loosening. The day had ended without a knot to worry between his hands, and that always left him a little at sea. He'd left a note for Janvier on a burglary that could wait until morning. Lucas was on sick leave with something trivial and trying to make it sound like nothing at all over the telephone. The building's lift had made its unhappy medieval groan several times for no reason anyone could see. Somewhere a radio was playing dance music as if it were June. He watched the boulevard the way a fisherman watches the surface of water. Not for spectacle, but for a disturbance that means something. The telephone rang just as Madame Maigret lifted the lid again and leaned into the steam. He reached for the receiver without haste and felt the warm body of the black instrument in his palm. They had had this or its twin for 20 years. Yes? Monsieur le Commissaire? The voice was careful and dry, like someone stepping on a damp staircase and testing each tread. I'm sorry to call you at home. It's Madame Landais, do you remember? He remembered a plump woman with a short cardigan and thin grey hair smoothed tightly back, her mouth always ready to be pursed, from a night 4 or 5 years ago when he and Janvier had needed a room with a view of Rue du Faubourg Saint-Martin. And 2 faces in particular. She had not asked questions. People like her rarely did. They noticed everything and said little until it was time. Yes, Madame Landais. It's about something. Perhaps nothing. But I told my husband, and he said, leave it, they will only laugh at you. And I thought of you. Her accent was Paris of the old faubourg. He could hear very faintly the echo of the hallway behind her, the scrape of a wooden chair, the hiss of gas on a stovetop. What sort of something? At the hotel. Hôtel des Remparts. We have a reservation. A room kept for 3 days. A deposit by postal order last week. A trunk delivered yesterday by a man with a blue cap who did not give his name. And no guest. Not a sign of him. People change their plans. Yes. Yes. She breathed once, gathered her thought like collecting a thread that had slipped. Only he walked by twice this afternoon. I say he because there is a certain way a man looks through a door when he intends to come in. You know these things, monsieur. You have known them longer than I have, and I have known them long enough. He walked past at 5 and again at 6. The second time he slowed. He put his hand on the handle and then did not open it. Maigret said nothing. He could feel the new weight the conversation had acquired. It was not suspicion yet. It was a change in air. And, she continued as if this were the part that embarrassed her, there was a young woman waiting on the bench at the foot of the stairs. She came at 4:30. She said she was expecting Monsieur H. Delcourt. That is the name on the postal order. She did not have a coat, only a dress of thin wool and a scarf. She said she would wait until he came. She had a small brown handbag and took nothing from it. At 6:45 she asked if there was a lavatory, and I showed her. She came out with her face pale. At 7:30 she stood up. She told me, "Thank you, madame," as if I had done her a kindness, and she went out. That was when I saw him walk past the second time, but he did not come in. She did not see him. You are sure it was the same man who reserved? No. she answered without hesitation. That is the trouble with me. I am sure of things I cannot prove, but I know he wanted room 14. He mentioned it in the letter. He underlined at the back. He asked if it looked onto the courtyard. And afterward, I could not stop thinking, how does a man know the number of a room he has not seen, unless he has stayed there before? Madame Maigret had come to the doorway, wiping her hands on a dishcloth, not because she minded his taking telephone calls at home, but because there was a certain tilt to his head when he listened that told her this was not about the burglary. She looked at him, as if to ask whether she should dish up his soup. Maigret covered the mouthpiece with his hand. It might be nothing, he told her, with a half-smile. Someone who doesn't like courtyard rooms after all. Then why? Reserve one, she said without irony. She knew him too well to tease when he was like this. The soup will keep. He uncovered the mouthpiece. Madame Landaise, is there anything on the trunk, a label, a monogram? The paper label has been torn off. There is only an old hotel sticker from Tours, faded so you can make out only hotel, and then 3 missing letters. The trunk is not new, the lock is not locked, I did not open it. I do not open trunks, it is not my habit. And you say the young woman had no coat. She was not poor in the way that shows, monsieur. Her shoes were newly shined. She stared at the numbers in the register as if they could tell her a different story. She asked me the letters of our name as she wrote them carefully, as if her hand were stiff. I have seen girls who wait with one hand in their bag to touch the coin they cannot afford to spend on coffee. It was not that with her. Did she give a name? She did not. She said only, "He will know me." She smiled when she said, but it was the sort of smile you make when you are alone. Behind his eyes, he saw the lobby of the Hôtel des Remparts as it had been 4 years ago. The yellowed wallpaper that had once tried to imitate silk with a little sheen. The umbrella stand that was a large jar with a crack mended by wire. The bench whose upholstery had been red once, and now was a doubtful color between wine and rust. The small brass plate on the register. He saw the staircase, the smell of soap and coal dust and old varnish. He heard the courtyard tap, which dripped at a steady rate and made winter sound like winter, even in summer. "Your husband thinks you're foolish," he said. "My husband thinks I should not call you because there is no crime. And perhaps there is not. But if the man who walked past twice comes by at 11, the porter will give him the key and we will not talk of it again. If he does not, I will sit and look at the trunk a long time tonight before going to bed, and I am too old for sitting. Monsieur, that is all." He did not promise anything. He told her only, "I'll pass by." He hung up and looked for a moment at the window. The rain made new scratches on the glass, with a noise like a pencil pressed too hard. He relit his pipe while his wife ladled soup. The smell of leeks and marrow bones was strong and honest. He ate the first spoonful slowly. "You're going," she said, not asking. "Yes. Take your scarf. It's colder than it looks." He stood and looked for his scarf on the peg behind the door. It wasn't there. He found it folded, as always, in the drawer of the little chest where he kept his gloves and notebooks. He shrugged on his thick overcoat, the one that made strangers think he was a warehouse manager, and put his hat on by habit just so, brim straight, not tilted. He kissed his wife on the cheek. The kiss tasted of steam and salt. "If you're late," she said, "I'll keep you some stew." "I won't be late." He paused. "He asked for room 14, he added, as if letting her into the smallest detail were a way of paying for the trouble he was giving her. 14, she repeated. "People always pick the same numbers. Soldiers and people from the provinces." He nodded. It was one of those remarks of hers that did not seem anything until later. He took the stairs, rather than wait for the lift to creak up to their floor. On the landing, he smelled the stale perfume of a neighbor who always went out at the wrong time of evening, with a short coat and too much hope. Outside, the rain had grown finer, more like a grey fabric drawn across the city. He turned up his collar, put his hands deep into his pockets and set off along the luminous slit of the boulevard, where buses sloshed and groaned, and the wet faces of passers-by were opened and closed again by the light of shop fronts. He did not. Hurry. The Hotel des Remparts was a 15-minute walk if you wanted to know nothing on the way, but he would take half an hour because the night would tell him something. He passed a cafe where the windows fumed and the zinc bar shone like pewter. A man in a cap leaned on the counter with the posture of those pretending to study the newspapers to avoid going home. A girl in a red raincoat turned up the collar, looked at her reflection, and then made no change. An old man stood under the awning of a tobacconist's, smoking in the rainy air with the stubborn patience of those who can no longer be on time or late. There were puddles in the ruts where delivery carts had ground the street down to its bones. He crossed Rue Oberkampf and saw in a butcher's window left lit by mistake a lamb's head under paper. A tram bell dinged in the distance in a different part of the city. There was comfort in the city being itself. It was like... By the time he reached the corner of Rue du Faubourg Saint-Martin, the rain had become so fine it was nearly dry. He stood for a moment, looking up. Through the lace of the curtain in the concierge's lodge, you could see a ghost of light. He saw a taxi turn slowly into the street, as if uncertain of its permission. A man in a hat stood across the way smoking, but this meant nothing. Men in hats stood smoking everywhere in this weather. He let his pipe go out and did not relight it. He had the sense that a small thing had idled out of place and set a dozen other small things just slightly askew. Nothing you could write in a report. A feeling, like hearing a clock 3 floors away, slow by a breath. He put his hand on the handle of the hotel door and felt the familiar coolness of the brass through damp gloves. Then he went inside. Madame Landais looked up before the bell on the door had finished its thin jingle. Her cardigan was the same, buttoned wrong at the throat, her face gathered into lines of attention rather than anxiety. She did not come out. From behind the desk, she gave a little nod, the sort one gives to an old customer. "You see," she murmured, almost apologetic. He took off his hat and shook the rain from the brim at the threshold so as not to mark her tiles. The lobby smelled of wet wool and a cabbage soup that had been served and cleared away. A stove ticked in the corner. The umbrella jar with its wire mend still stood where he remembered it. In the shadow near the stairs, a trunk crouched, blackened, had the corners by use, a rope handle at one end where leather had given way. Her husband sat with a newspaper spread like a shield, the spectacles perched on the tip of his nose. He lowered them a fraction to look at Maigret, then raised them again as if to say there was nothing to see. He tapped the ash from his cigarette into an enamel saucer balanced on the banister. "Where is the letter?" Maigret asked without greeting beyond the nod. His voice could be kind when he wanted. Tonight he let it be tired. She slid a folded paper from under the blotter. It was the sort of lined sheet you buy in packets, the ink a washed blue as if the nib had been cleaned on the margin. Room at the back, if possible. 14, 2 nights, H. Delcourt, deposit enclosed. The underline beneath, "at the back," was firm and just a little too heavy, as if to persuade more than to emphasize. "The postal order?" he asked. "In the drawer. Cashed. I can show you the stub." She said it quickly, almost defensive, and then softened. "You know how it is with us. We do not have cushions to lean on." He held the letter a moment longer. The paper smelled of nothing, not tobacco, not cologne. The envelope, which she had kept, bore a clean stamp and a postmark rubbed nearly away. You could make out only the last letters. Bre Aubervilliers, Malakoff. It could have been any of them, and the trunk. "I did not open it," she said as earlier. "Only the porter tried the hasp because it was not turned." Maigret crouched and lifted the lid a finger's width. The hinges creaked a little. Inside, darkness and the dry smell of old cloth and a trace of camphor. Something shifted the smallest amount, the way folded clothes settle again after the air has moved. He let it down quietly. He felt suddenly the eyes of the husband on his. back and straightened without looking. She was there. The landlady's voice had lowered. From 4:30 to 7:30, she did not ring. She stood, then sat, and stood again. She smiled at me once as if to say, "Don't worry, I am not making trouble." When she came from the lavatory, her face had become white in a different way. In what way? He turned his head a little, which was as much as asking for precision. The powder, too much of it on the cheeks. A girl does that when she has cried and wants to put her face back the way it was. He nodded. May I? He opened the door to the corridor. The tiled floor had a pattern of black and yellow diamonds gone grey at their edges. The washroom smelled of soap that was not recent. The mirror showed a dull moon. There was a pale trace on the sink where a palm had steadied itself and left powder in the tiny scratches of the porcelain. He stood until the drip in the courtyard found its rhythm again behind the wall. Room 14 was prepared, as if expecting someone who knew exactly what to expect. The bed pulled tight, the water carafe 3/4 full, a towel folded into a square that did not match the others. He lifted the corner of the towel and saw the crease. It had been folded some time ago. The window gave onto the courtyard where the tap dripped and a bicycle leaned under a stair. The sill was dry. If anyone had opened it in the rain, they had wiped it with more care than most guests gave to such things. He touched the radiator. Warm, not hot. He closed the door without locking it and went down again. He did not ask for the description of the man. Madame would give him one made of impressions that would not translate into a face. And that was enough for now. Will you have a coffee? She asked. If it's no trouble. She brought it in a thick cup with a piece of sugar that had been dropped and glued back together by its own damp. He did not sweeten it. He sat where the girl had sat, on the bench by the stairs. The husband turned a page with a sigh that could have been for the news, or simply for the act of turning dot outside, streetlight, made a rectangle on the glass of the door that trembled when a bus went by. Footsteps. Sometimes they slowed. Sometimes they passed. At 9:05, the telephone on the desk trilled, thin and steady. Madame picked it up with 2 fingers, as if the receiver were hot. Hôtel des Remparts. A breath, not a voice. Then a man's tone, level and close. Is the room at the back free? It is ready. A pause. The line clicked as if a coin had fallen back into a slot, and then there was only the little hum of the wire. Madame replaced the receiver and looked at Maigret. She did not speak. He drew once on his pipe without lighting it and let it go. We'll leave the chain off, he said, and the light on. Madame left the chain off and turned the lobby. Lamp a notch lower. The stove ticked. A draft moved under the door each time a car went by, nudging the light dot. At 9:20, the handle turned. A man entered with the measured step of someone who dislikes finding eyes on him. He took off his hat at once and held it brim upward so the rain would not drip. Medium height, compact, ears a little too pink. A good coat, a hat that had seen more seasons. He had kept his gloves on too long. He peeled them off by the fingertips and tucked them into the hat. Good evening, he said, voice even. His eyes made a small circuit. Stove, bench, register, trunk, without stopping. Only at the trunk a brief tightening of the mouth. Room at the back, he added, if it is still possible. It is ready, said Madame. Your papers, he laid an identity card on the blotter. Henri Delcourt, clerk, 28 Rue des Écoles, Aubervilliers. The photograph was younger. He wrote slowly. The H of Henri seemed to require a start. He underlined nothing. The address suited the postmark that had ended in Bray. Any messages? He asked without looking quite at her. No, monsieur. He nodded, glanced once at the bench, whose cushion still remembered another weight, then slipped the key into his pocket, with the ease of a man who already knew where the lock was. He said nothing about the trunk. That too was a kind of statement. He climbed, counting without looking. pausing the faintest instant at the second landing before turning toward the back. A man who went first to the room in his head, then to the one with the key. His steps were heavy but careful. On the third step the wood creaked. He altered his weight to avoid it. The husband folded his newspaper. The stove ticked twice and dozed. Maigret lit his pipe and let it go out. 10 minutes, then 15. Above, a key turned softly. Water ran and stopped. The window latch clicked. The air shifted by a thread. Wet stone, old varnish, a faint hair. Tonic when a breath of cooler air came down the stair. He came back once without his coat to ask for another towel. Up close, his skin had the flat tone of men who sit under artificial light. On his ring finger a pale band suggested a habit dropped recently. His shoes were almost dry. The crown of the hat showed no wet. He thanked Madame, turned, and his glance slid to the telephone as if to a glass of water. He used it 5 minutes later, closing the booth with unnecessary care. They heard only breathing and the taps of the dial. "Yes," he said at last, softly. A silence. "I see." A click. He remained a moment listening to the dial return, then went upstairs again. At 9:30. The telephone rang from outside, its thin sound drawing a line through the room. Madame looked at Maigret. He nodded. "Hôtel des Remparts." A young woman's voice, very composed. "Is room 14 taken?" "It is." "Thank you." She did not hang up at once. Nor did Madame. The breathing ceased. The line went dead. "Don't mention it," Maigret said. "If she comes back, let her come." Madame set the receiver down as if it were eggshell. Upstairs, a floorboard murmured. The courtyard tap counted seconds. The trunk waited by the stairs like an animal that knows its name. Maigret settled to wait. He relit his pipe. They did not have long to wait. At 10 the door moved without a jingle, as if a hand had held the bell. A young woman came in with the careful step of someone who has made up her mind and is trying not to let the body betray it. She had a coat, now one too big for her, the hem damp and darkened, a scarf tied under the hair so that the ends were tucked in. The brown handbag was the same. She held it two-handed, as if it contained something that might jump out. Her shoes had been wiped on the mat outside with conscientious little strokes. The toes still shone from polish, but the edges were grayed by water. "Bonsoir," she said to no one in particular, and then to Madame, "May I sit?" "Of course." Madame did not look at Maigret. The girl's eyes swept the room quickly and became cautious when they reached the trunk. She sat on the bench, as she had before, and drew her coat close, not because of cold, but to keep her shape from showing. Her powder was fresh and a little too dry. She glanced at the telephone and looked away. She was not poor in the way that shows, as Madame had said, but she counted her money in the way of those who have learned to. "Would you like a coffee?" Maigret asked, not moving. His voice was mild, the voice of a man who makes conversation to make time pass, she thought, then shook her head. "No, thank you." "If you wish him called," Madame offered. The girl's mouth made the slightest curve. "He knows," she said. "He will come down." They waited together as if for a bus. Upstairs water ran a short time, then stopped. A floorboard gave and was eased back. The stove clicked and settled deeper into its warmth. The girl's eyes were on her hands, which turned the bag's clasp, fastened it, unfastened it, fastened it again. She wore no ring. The left hand had a faint thin line where a glove button had pressed too long. Maigret lit his pipe and let the match burn down between his fingers to the pane, then shook it out. The husband behind the newspaper sighed and made a page change noisier than needed. At 10:15 the stair whispered. The man from room 14 came down 2 steps, stopped where he could see the lobby and not be seen from the street, and hesitated as if considering which shape to take. He had not put on his coat. His collar was open. His hair had been combed with a wet hand. He saw the girl, and in that instant a small thing left his face and did not return. An idea of himself. He came down the rest of the way. "You shouldn't have," he said, voice low and not unkind. "You wrote?" she answered, as if that covered the world. "Then things be—" He paused and searched for a word he could live with in front of ears. "Are different." She nodded once, as if she had prepared herself for that sentence, and then, because being prepared is not the same as arriving, her mouth trembled. She swallowed, and it went away. Her eyes flicked to the trunk. A fraction of hope woke and tried to stand up. "You brought it," she said, almost with relief. He followed her glance, and his mouth tightened, more in annoyance with himself than with her. "No," he said, "that isn't— I don't know whose that is." She didn't look at him for a breath. When she raised her face again, it was steadier. She looked at his left hand. The pale band there was as unmistakable as a chalk mark on a pavement. "It's very late," he said. "Tomorrow after the office, we'll go somewhere quiet. Here, it isn't good." Her fingers went to the edge of the scarf, then dropped. "Tomorrow," she repeated without warmth. She stood as if the decision had been waiting under her, and she had only to rise to release it. "Thank you, madame." The words were the same as she had used earlier when leaving, and carried the same modest dignity, as if the kindness had been in letting her go. She did not look at the man again. She went to the door, opened it carefully so the bell would not ring, and went out. The smell of wet street swept in behind her and folded itself into the cabbage soup and coal dot. The man remained where he was a moment, then took a step toward the door. He looked through the glass as if at a window on a train. She had turned left. Under the lamp she raised her face to the rain and did not hurry. He did not open the door. He watched until she was no longer there to be watched, then let his hand fall and turned back. "Will you be wanting the trunk, monsieur?" Madame asked, in the tone of housekeeping, which can cover embarrassment better than any other. He looked at it too long and shook his head quickly, almost with irritation. "No, it has nothing to do with me." He went up. His steps were not the same. He missed the board that creaked without thinking. The husband laid down his newspaper and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You'll keep the chain off?" he asked his wife, not looking at Maigret. "For a little while," Maigret said. He drew on his pipe, which had gone out, and did not relight it. He stood and crossed to the door, opened it, and looked into the street, more to smell the air than to see. The rain was finer. There were fewer footsteps. A taxi went past with its light shut. On the opposite side, a cat leapt from a doorway to another like water. There was no girl. He closed the door. In the lobby, the trunk sat implacably. The rope handle was frayed, where many hands had chosen to lift it from the same side. On the lid in a corner, a smear of pale dust had been disturbed, and 2 fingertips had left their dull moons. He glanced at Madame. She shook her head. Not hers. Upstairs, a window latch clicked again and stayed. The courtyard tap counted seconds. Something had not fitted, and by not fitting had settled into place. He sat, heavy as a piece of furniture, to wait for what would announce itself next. Midnight was not yet near, but the lobby had folded into that special quiet of places that have decided to be done for the day. The husband snuffed his cigarette and took another immediately from the same packet, as if to keep his fingers busy. Madame Landais set down, then took up, then set down again, the ledger. The trunk waited with its dull patience. "I'll walk a little," Maigret said, as much to the stove as to anyone. "If he comes down, don't call out." Madame nodded. "He sees more if he believes no one is looking." He stepped into the street. The rain had fallen to a fine dust that made the air seem to move even when it did not. He turned left, where he had last seen the girl's scarf catch the light. There are not many places to go at that hour if you have no coat, and nothing to do but think. A bus shelter at the corner held a man asleep in his cap, and a woman counting her change for no reason but to have something to do with her hands. Beyond, under the awning of a closed pharmacy, she stood with the big coat held around her by crossed arms. He did not approach directly. He crossed, stopped to fill his pipe at the curb, struck a match that flared, and laid a little lake of light on the wet pavement. She glanced, then looked away. When he came near, she did not step back. "You didn't take the coffee," he observed, as if he were blaming the weather. "It would have made me warm, and that is worse," she said, surprising herself. The voice was fuller than before, as if she had put her dignity back on. "I'll have farther to go than the coffee would carry," he said. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Belleville, not far, only uphill." They stood without haste. The pharmacy's shutters smelled of paint. In the glass, he saw them both as shadows. "You thought he had brought your trunk," he said after a little, without sharpness. He was not fishing, he was setting down a plate to see what would come to it. She did not answer at once, but her fingers tightened under the coat. "I sent it," she said at last, low. "He told me it was better so. Not to arrive together, not to draw his attention." The word tasted foolish, and she made a face at herself for having used it. "I asked the man from the Moublé to carry it. He has a cap. He took it on a trolley. I thought if it was already there, then everything would be there." "You wrote the name on the order?" "I wrote nothing. He sent the postal order. He said he would take the room." She raised her chin a fraction. "He did take it." He let the smoke out slowly. "You chose it?" "He chose it," she said quickly. "He said the back is quieter. He has his nerves." The last words came with the resignation of someone who has been educated in other people's nerves. "And Tours?" He did not look at her when he asked. She blinked. "Tours?" "The old hotel sticker," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to notice such a thing. "It's worn. You wouldn't have stuck it yourself." "My aunt," she said, then shook her head. "Not really an aunt, someone from before. When I came to Paris, I had only that trunk. It has followed me from room to room. It still smells of her wardrobe. Violets." She smiled the smallest amount. "I suppose that is silly." "It isn't silly." He watched the thin stream of breath from her mouth, steady now. "What is your name?" She hesitated, and then gave it as if she were handing over a coin she had held too long. "Odile." He did not offer his. She had already guessed enough. "Do you have enough to get home?" "Yes." She lied politely and convincingly, with the calm of a girl who has had practice making something last. "I have. Tomorrow I'm at the shop." "What shop?" "Haberdashery, Rue de la Folie Méricourt, ribbons and thread." She gave a small, almost cheerful laugh. "My life is a drawer of buttons, monsieur." And he. She looked past him toward the awning's edge where a drop gathered courage before falling. "He is in an office. He stamps things. He doesn't like that it leaves ink on his hands. He washes too much. When he puts his ring back on, it squeaks." He nodded once, as if confirming a private thought. A taxi rolled by, the meter flag, down, and they both watched it, as if it were a fish in an aquarium. He did not ask more. "If you go back," he said, "don't ring. The door is unlatched." He paused. "Your trunk is safe." Her mouth crooked. "For now," she said, and the words were not about wood and leather. He let her go then. She walked with that same, careful, deliberate pace, the coat too big, the scarf ends tucked as if to keep in more than warmth. He watched her pass the corner where the pavement tilts, watched her take the hill without hurry. Then he turned back. The lobby had not moved. Madame lifted her eyes as he came in. Her husband had surrendered to his chair and breathed with the deep neutrality of sleep. She called again, Madame said. "Or not her. Someone. A man." "The room at the back?" he asked. When I said it was taken, he hung up. No name. How? Long ago? A quarter hour. He sat and looked at the trunk as if expecting it to address him. On the lid, the two pale finger marks had been joined by a third, lower down, smaller. Madame spread her hands. It was not I. He came down. Only to ask what time the post opens, she said. We told him 7. He said he would leave before then. Did he touch it? He looked at it as one looks at a wall that wasn't there yesterday. Maigret leaned forward and with his thumb touched the edge of the lid. The lock still sat open, its tongue retracted. He lifted it again a little. Cloth, camphor, a sweetness like old perfume that had swallowed its own sugar. Something heavy lay under the top layer. He could feel the resistance when the air moved. He did not disturb it. Keep the key of the pie. Street door in, he said. If he goes out, let him. You will follow? Perhaps not far. They waited. The stove sighed. Somewhere a drip faltered and found itself again. At 11, footsteps above, then the soft closing of a door, without the click of a lock. He came down with a suitcase that had not been there before. Flat, office-like, a case for papers rather than clothes. He was clean-shaven now, as if he had shaved again to leave. He carried his hat, and in the other hand a folded coat. He began with a glance at the trunk, then stopped. No, nothing. He put down the case long enough to set his collar. I'll be back, he said to the room in general, and to no one in particular. The street door opened. The bell caught lightly by his free hand, and the knight reached in to touch the tiles. Maigret waited a heartbeat, 2, then rose with the weight of a man who has decided not to hurry. He took his hat, nodded to Madame, and followed the damp trace the man left that was not water. He turned left at first, then cut across to the right, as if listening to a map inside his coat. Maigret kept far enough back that the wet sound of his own steps could belong to anyone. At the corner where the canal shows its black shoulder between buildings, the man paused a moment, not so much to look as to let his thoughts catch up. The water took the little rain without comment. A barge under the bridge smelled of diesel and onions cooked too long. He went on to a green letterbox and stood a second with his case on his knee while he took something from his inside pocket. The envelope was thick for a few words. He held it flat in his palm before feeding it into the slit. It went with a heavier sound than paper alone. He listened to it drop, as if to make sure it had chosen to fall. The canal drew him back. On the iron footbridge he stopped and leaned his case against the rail. He put 2 fingers into his waistcoat pocket and brought out a small thing that sat in his hand like a coin you might keep for luck. He looked at it long enough to finish deciding something he had half decided already. His hand made a little arc. The water took it without a splash, only a circle that enlarged and forgot itself. He watched until there was nothing more to watch, picked up his case and went on. At a cafe with yellow paint rubbed thin where elbows have rubbed, he asked for the telephone with a sort of apology. The barman, who had seen too many apologies in his time to care, pushed the booth door with his hip and held it until the man had gone in. Through the smeared glass, Maigret saw him dial carefully, counting the holes. He stood with the case at his feet and spoke in a low voice that didn't carry. There were pauses in which he said nothing at all, only held the receiver as if he were being given instructions he had not asked for and would obey because he did not know what else to do. When he came out, he did not drink the coffee the barman had poured from habit. He pushed it away with the back of his knuckles, left coins beside it with the accuracy of a man settling an account he would not come back to dispute, and went out. Another set of footsteps had been there some time, without belonging to anyone. They were not following him exactly. They were going where he went because they had chosen to go that way. A man in a cap without a visor, the kind porters wear when they are not working, stood under a doorway and studied the rain. He watched the cafe door a moment longer than a man watches a door that means nothing, and then remembered to watch the rain again. He struck a match and lit nothing with it. The clerk crossed back toward the hotel by another street, one that refused to be lit. He kept to the side where the houses had their backs. Twice he slowed and twice he decided not to turn his head. He passed a chemist's that had left its green cross on all night. The pulses of light made him and his case alternate between sickness and health. At the corner near the hotel he stopped, in the shadow of the shuttered bakery, and took his time putting on his coat as if coats were more reliable than people. He looked into the glass of the door before he pushed it, not to see himself, but to see whether he was someone else's object. Madame Landais was at the desk, with a book open and a pencil between the pages, as if to keep a place she did not care about. The husband slept with his mouth shut, which gave him a look of having chosen silence. The stove breathed the way contented animals breathe in their sleep. "You will wake me at 6, the man said simply. His voice had lost the roughness it had had earlier. "And if anyone asks for me, if anyone telephones, I am not here." He set down 2 envelopes side by side like playing cards. "For the post in the morning." "Thank you," she nodded. She had been given envelopes to post by more lives than she could have remembered singly. She did not look at the names. He reached then toward the trunk without seeming to notice that he had. His fingers made a small motion near the rope handle, stopped, and closed again. He picked up his case and went up. The stair registered him. 1 step at a time, Maigret came in behind him without hurry. The man in the cap without a visor had wandered past and would perhaps wander past again. He took off his hat. The lobby was as it had been. The same small smells stirred and settled. Back, he sat where he had sat, as the bench lets a particular weight shape it. 6, Madame repeated quietly, for herself as much as for anyone else. He paid for 2 nights. It is only 1. It is often only 1, the husband said, not. Opening his eyes, Maigret put a hand on the trunk, and felt the way a doctor puts a hand on a shoulder to say, nothing is wrong yet. Through wood and cloth, there was something that did not give easily, as if a box had been wrapped into softness. The lock tongue rested back in its mouth. He let the lid settle again and kept his hand there. Upstairs, water ran. Not a washing of hands this time, but of a basin emptied in one motion, as though to erase a shape. The window latch clicked and stayed. The courtyard tap went on, counting the seconds, and the seconds went on, allowing themselves to be counted. "Tomorrow," he said, almost to the trunk. 7. Dawn came without changing much. The rain had thinned to a breath that did not wet, but made everything seem a degree nearer to its own grey. The street under the hotel's window began to speak in the low monosyllables of deliveries and shutters and brooms. At 6 there was a light knock upstairs and the sound of a chair being moved. He came down a few minutes later, hat on, case in hand, the collar of his coat turned but not buttoned. He had shaved again too close along the jaw. His skin showed a pale scrape. He put the key on the blotter with a little tap. "Nothing," he said, meaning no messages. "I'll settle what is owed." Madame told him it had been paid by the deposit. He nodded, looked past her once more at the trunk without allowing the look to be seen, and said, in the tone of someone remembering a bag of cherries that cannot be carried, "If there is any claim about that, it is not mine." "Of course," she said, as if humouring a child. He went out without breakfast. Maigret waited for the door to stop shaking, and then followed, hat in hand, hands deep in his coat pockets, as if to keep them from offering advice. The cold put a film on the inside of his nostrils that made the first breath taste of metal. The man kept to the edges of the morning, where milk carts and men with their hands blue from water did their work. He did not look behind him. At the post office by the canal, a small line had already formed under the glass where you ask for the poste restante. He stood there with his case against his leg and his shoulders straight. When it was his turn, he gave his name quietly. The clerk studied his card, then a ledger. "You are Delcourt?" the clerk said, half a question. He ran a finger along an entry. "It is written here with a T. You signed last time with it." The man did not change expression. "People make mistakes," he said in a voice without interest. He laid the card flatter under the glass so the photograph would be watched instead of the letters. The clerk shrugged that provincial shrug that is older than Paris, wrote something in his book, and slid an envelope out through the slot. It was the size that lies flat in a jacket and prints itself there. He put it in the case without opening it. He did not hurry. He did not dawdle. Outside, he stood a second in the lee of the building and watched a bus go somewhere else. A man, in a cap without a visor, drifted in the shallow way of men who have not yet decided who they are today. He looked at the case, then at the man's face, and then at nothing at all. The man did not see him or decided not to. He took the street that goes back toward the faubourg with that careful pace of those who wish to be ordinary. At a corner where a café had set out its chairs to dry, he put the case on a chair, opened it and slid his hand in. When he took it out again, there was nothing to see. He paid for a coffee he did not drink, and a half-roll he did not touch, and after a minute, as long as a cigarette that is not smoked, he went on. Maigret let him go. He knew the places where such men go at that hour. To an office, too early, to open, to a bridge, to a street where their wives still sleep. It was not the moment to force the story to jump. He turned back. The city had become the city. A woman pulled a cart with a crate of carrots. A dog lifted a leg into nothing because there was no tree. When he pushed the hotel door, the bell rang with its small, polite sound. The husband was awake and had folded his newspaper into the shape of resignation. Madame had her coat across her shoulders over her apron. She was talking to a man in a blue cap who smelled of damp rope and the sweetness of cheap tobacco. So I told her I would take it. Why not? And she would give me £1.50 for the trolley and another later when she had it, the man was saying. He stopped when he saw Maigret and looked at him with the quick calculation of men who have all their lives had to decide in an instant whether a stranger will make their day harder. "This is the one who brought it," Madame said. The man nodded, making it clear that he had known it all along. "From Rue Moret, 3rd floor left," he added, as if that were a password. "Who gave it to you?" "A young one. She says Odile when Madame calls her. She had not the key. She laughed and said, 'It isn't locked. What have I to steal from myself?' She didn't laugh very well. She watched me the whole time, like a cat watches a high trap she isn't in. I brought it yesterday before dinner, like she asked. She stood at the corner to see if I went in. She did not want to be seen with me. I am not handsome. You will have noticed." "Did anyone follow you?" He scratched, behind one ear under the cap. A little man in a good coat stood across and didn't stand across, the kind who has soft shoes. He looked at Maigret's boots and decided he could finish the sentence. He went on afterward in the direction of the canal. "He wasn't for me. He was for somebody else." "You touched the trunk?" Maigret asked, glancing at the pale marks. "I touched it here," he said, laying 2 fingers in the air. "I am not a dancer. I lifted where it lifts. It's heavy, like there is a box inside with something that does not care if it is upside down." "You have good hands," Maigret said. "Do you carry things for the Moublé?" "Sometimes," he said without shame. "Sometimes for the market, sometimes for no one at all. The girl said if no one comes in 2 days, I could take it back to Madame Bonvoisin, and she would pay me from her wages by little." He shrugged. "If there is trouble about it, I am not married to it." "There is no trouble," Maigret said. "Not yet." He looked at Madame. "Hold any letters that come. If someone asks for the trunk, ask for a name first." She nodded. "He left 2 for the post," she said, lowering her voice as if the paper might hear itself. "To Aubervilliers, and to a bureau on Rue Réaumur. I did not read them. I saw only the places when I turned them." He glanced at the wall clock, which was 5 minutes slow, and honest about it. "What time does the shop open?" "9, she said. "9, a little before, if she sweeps." He put his hat on and drew the knot of his scarf a finger's breadth lower. "I'll step out," he said. "If he returns, let him." He put his hand on the trunk a moment, as one lays a hand on a shoulder in passing, and then went into the morning that had decided to be day dot. He cut across toward Rue Morey, where the houses look as if they have taken their own measure and decided to be enough. The meublé was the color of old bread, its doorway not wide enough for two to pass without deciding who would go first. A smell of boiled linen and iron filings lived in the corridor, dont Madame Bonvoisin had a knitted shawl pulled around her as if it were armor. She had the frank eyes of women who have seen too many young lives pass their door and do the same things for the same reasons. "You're for Odile," she said, as if she had been expecting not him, but the category of him. "Third left. She has gone to work. I told her to leave me the note for the man with the trolley." He followed her up. The stairs had learned where to complain. She walked on the edges. Odile's door had a paper label with the name written. Neat and a little too upright. Inside, the room had the order of someone who is tidy, because it is the one thing she can make obey. The square of floor where the trunk had stood was cleaner than the rest, scrubbed recently. A darker rectangle remained where its weight had kept the boards from fading. On the table, a saucer held 3 buttons, one black, one mother of pearl that had lost its shank, one brown that did not match anything. A spool of violet thread lay on its side like a small obligation postponed dot. The bed was made tight, military. On the nail by the window, a coat that was not hers hung, too large by a shoulder. The window showed a slice of wall and a small sky. On the mantel, a postcard of Tours Cathedral, the stamp torn off. The violet smell was faint and old, like a voice from another room. "She came back at midnight," Madame Bonvoisin said in a tone that did not ask. She did not cry. She sat here without her shoes and looked at nothing until 1. Then she lay down dressed and slept badly and got up before 6 to sweep. She left me this. She held out a folded paper. On it, in a careful hand, was written, "For the man with the trolley, 2 francs now, the rest Saturday. I will not forget." "Oh, and him?" Maigret asked. "He was here 3 times in the month, always Sundays, never longer than half an hour. He does not like rooms that have other people behind the walls. He washed his hands as soon as he came and as soon as he went. He is not violent. He is—" She searched for the word. "Careful. Ever asked for her trunk?" No. He would. Look at it as if it were disobedient. He would say, "You will not need that," and she would say nothing. Last week a little man with soft shoes asked if she was in and if she had family in Tours. She lifted her chin toward the postcard. "I told him she had me, and that was enough." "Did she speak of changing rooms?" "She said, 'Soon I will not be here.' She did not say where. I'm not offended. When a girl goes, it is because she must. There was no ring. There is no ring." She looked at his hands, as if to see whether he understood the weight of that dot he. Looked around once more, not touching. On the corner of the table a scrap of paper lay with H, written 3 times in a deliberate hand, each one heavier than the last, as if she had been testing the weight of a letter. He put his finger beside it and did not take it. He saw the faint talc on the washstand where she had leaned and steadied herself, a neat semicircle at the edge. "Her trunk," he said without turning, "was light or heavy?" Madame Bonvoisin made a face. "It is what a trunk is for a girl, who has not much. It is lighter than a mother's trunk, heavier than a child's. She has good shoes and a winter dress and a photograph with no frame." I carried one end last week when she wanted to see if the floor would take it. It was not heavy. Why? Because last night it was heavy, he said. Madame Bonvoisin's jaw moved once, as if she had bitten a thread. Then someone gave her a present she did not ask for. At 5:09, the shop was already open a hand's breadth. A girl with a fringe and pins in her mouth swept sawdust that had been scattered to catch dust. Odile was behind the counter counting buttons into packets, her face the kind that is less pretty when it is composed, and pretty enough when it forgets to be. When she saw him, she made a small pause, and then a little nod. "I came," he said, as if it were an errand for someone else, for thread, black, and needles that do not break. She set the spool on the glass and added the needles. "We have stronger ones, but they cost more," she said, not asking. "I will trust the cheaper to be good," he said. He put coins on the counter. She did not push one back and say he had given too much. She moved her hand as if to and then thought better of it. The trunk, he said with the same neutrality he had for the thread, was heavier than Madame believed. Her eyes flickered once. "I did not put anything in it," she said. "I took things out. I sold the hat to Claire on the 4th. I sold the shawl to Madame Bonvoisin because she said the damp in her bones speaks." She lifted her chin a fraction. "I do not have much to make weight. It is not a weight that cares which way it lies," he said, as if a box were inside. She looked past him to the door where a woman in a hat was hesitating, reading prices in her head. "He was afraid," she said very low. "He is afraid of small things, monsieur. The noise a key makes, a step that always creaks, a number. He said I was careless because I wore my scarf the same way always. He told me to stand differently when I wait. The letters," he said, still as if they were about thread. "He posts from the street, not from home." She made a small gesture that could have been agreement or could have been exhaustion. "He said it is safer if things have no return. He said the first post is best because it goes far by noon. He said words like he was washing his hands with them." A man stood on the pavement opposite, looking at the cheeses in the grocer's. Window with attention he did not give to cheese. He had the same soft shoes, the same hat without a visor, as if his head disliked authority. "If he asks you for anything, if someone you do not know asks to take something you have paid for, what do you do?" Maigret asked. "I say no," she said, and the word was firm without being loud. "I am not foolish." He touched the brim of his hat. "Then keep your buttons," he said, and went out. On the pavement he did not look at the man. He walked past him as one passes a lamp-post. The man looked at nothing and let him go. The rain had stopped tracing lines in the air and begun to collect in the gutters for itself. By the time he reached the corner where the street turns toward the hotel, the city had that sound it gets when everyone has decided who they will be for the day. When he pushed the door of the Hôtel des Remparts, Madame lifted her head in a way that meant something had occurred. On the blotter lay an envelope, thick and square, with the address written in a hand that had tried to disguise itself and failed. It read, "Monsieur H. Delcourt, room at the back." The T had been added late, in a different pressure. "Who brought it?" he asked, turning the envelope in his fingers as if to warm it. "A boy," Madame said. "Red ears." He looked at the trunk once as if to see if it would answer. He said, "For the room at the back," and wouldn't take the tip. Man was waiting under the awning, small hat without a visor. He pretended to read the posters while the boy came in. Maigret held the envelope to the lamp. The paper was thick and matte. Inside something lay flat, the outline not paper, not coin. A small oblong with a hole at one end, the shadow of a card beside it. He did not open it. On the back, with Madame's pencil, he wrote the hour and his initials, and laid it on the blotter just so, where a man would find it with his hand before his eyes found it. Outside, the morning unwound. A woman's laugh came from nowhere and went nowhere. The stove had found its comfort for the day and breathed it. In room 14, the radiator ticked and was still Dot. At 10, the telephone rang. Madame picked it up and put her hand over the mouthpiece, as if to give the voice more privacy. Hôtel des Remparts, the room at the back. The same careful, close voice as before, though not the clerk's. It is taken. For him, 4 o'clock. The line died without a goodbye. She looked at Maigret. It is not a street, he said. It is an hour. He went up to room 14 once more without noise. The bed had been sat on, then smoothed again. The basin had no ring of soap. A fleck of shaving foam had dried to a ghost beside the plug. He opened the window a crack. The courtyard gave him its smell of damp stone and onions simmering somewhere. He went back down and stood a moment with his hand on the trunk's lid, not to push but to feel it breathe back its dumb weight. At 11 he crossed to the cafe opposite where the window fumed gently and men stood in their coats to drink quickly and leave. He ordered nothing for a minute so that the barman would not fuss over him. The small man with the soft shoes came in, bought a newspaper, and held it in his hand like a man who does not read. He looked at himself in the black window and decided nothing. Maigret watched the street behind his own reflection. When he had finished watching, he went back. Shortly after noon, the door opened in a way doors do when people are not sure whether they want them to. He came in with his case and a face gone smooth from making it so. He asked for his key, though he had put it down earlier, and then, as if remembering the habits of hotels, said, "Any messages?" Madame pushed the envelope toward him with the practiced movement of one who does not know and does not want to. He picked it up without appearing to, slid it under his case with 2 fingers, then changed his mind and took it back out as if the weight had betrayed it as important. He did not open it there. He went to the telephone booth, closed the door carefully, and did not call anyone. In the booth's glass, his mouth was a thin line. He went up. The stair spoke, and then stopped. Water ran for a second. A latch found its position, a case was set down. When he came back, his eyes were like a man's, who has taken a sip he hoped would be medicine, and found it only water. He put his hand on the trunk and lifted it a fraction, the way you test whether an old friend will still dance. He let it down. "Is there a porter?" he asked, turning to Madame. "Who could move this for me? Not now, later, at 4. "At 4, she repeated neutrally. "To where?" the husband asked, without looking up. He hesitated the briefest breath. "Not far." He made a vague gesture toward the street that contained all directions. "I will be here." He took the envelope with him, this time tucking it into his coat. He went out and the bell did not ring because he took it gently in his hand. The man in soft shoes, who had been studying the grocer's display of tins as if they were art, looked at his coat, and nothing else. Maigret stood a moment in the open door, as a man stands to smell the weather. He watched the little man blow, on his fingers though he wore gloves. He watched a woman pause at the glass, the scarf close to her throat, her eyes sliding to the trunk, as if the leather could answer a question. Odile did not come in. She stood long enough to make the decision and then went on, her shoulders squarer than the coat allowed. He went to the desk and dialed without looking at the numbers. "K," a voice said, heavy with paperwork. "Janvier," he said. "If you have nothing better." He listened to Janvier say he had 3 better things and laughed without sound. "Walk past the Hôtel des Remparts at 3:30. If you see a trunk walk out on 2 men's backs, follow it. But don't be clever. There is a small man with soft shoes who will do the cleverness for you. If he speaks to you, ask him whether Tours has 2 cathedrals." Janvier grunted something that was almost a joke and rang off. Maigret replaced the receiver. He did not. Tell Madame he did not need to. The hotel had become a lung that breathed slow. At 2, the post came late and brought nothing. At 3, the light rubbed itself thin, and the rain thought of returning. The trunk sat and took the room's weight into itself. Twice the telephone rang with no one at the other end. Once a woman called to ask the price of room 14, then said, "Thank you," as Odile had, and hung up. At 4:10, the man was back, hat down, collar up, the tiredness of office light on his skin. He nodded to the trunk as you nod to a dog you are not sure will bite, and said, "Now, if you please." The porter from the market came, cap crooked, hands ready. He bent, took the rope handle, and swore softly with respect. "Where to?" he asked, but the man only said, "I will show you." He put money on the blotter with the neat pressure of digits that add up. Maigret took his hat and did not hurry. The small man with soft shoes had already unhooked himself from the wall and was studying the pattern of tiles as if they could tell him the route. In the room above, the radiator ticked twice as if to mark the hour for itself. The door opened. The bell made its thin, dutiful sound. They went out into a street that had turned to pewter, with the weight of a box inside a trunk held between two men, and an hour that had finally come to meet it. They went at a porter's pace, which lets a city pass without having to decide what it means. The little man in soft shoes kept to the gutters and to shadows that were not really shadows. His eyes were always on the rectangle between two backs where the rope handle pulled. At the corner by the station, a big-shouldered fellow in a scarf was reading a sports sheet upside down. He did not look up. Janvier's coat had rain on it that had stopped falling. Gare de l'Est breathed its familiar smell of steam and old leather that has seen too many hands. Pigeons made their small business-like noises in the rafters, as if counting shipments. The consigne was a mouth of iron grills, with a man behind it who wrote with a pencil he had chewed to a flat. "Deposit?" the clerk said without being asked. The porter set the trunk down with a respectful growl of effort. The little man arrived at the same instant, coin already between finger and thumb, as if to sew the gesture into the other man's. "I'll settle it," he said, tone mild. He did not look at Delcourt. He looked at the trunk the way one looks at a child who has been told not to speak. Delcourt put his hand flat on the lid. He had the envelope in his coat. The oblong inside made a thin, stupid weight against his ribs. He did not take it out. "To leave, I need a name," the clerk said. "A name is enough." "Delcourt," the little man said, adding the T with the same light insistence that had written it on the hotel envelope. "Delcourt," said the man, whose name it was, without the T, not looking at him. His hand stayed on the lid, as if the trunk might otherwise tell them what was inside. Maigret did nothing except shift his weight, so that his presence leaned a little more into the space. "If there is to be a deposit," he said mildly, "you will have a ticket. Tickets are worse than numbers. They remember." The little man's coin went soft in his fingers and stayed there. "It is not your affair," he said to no one in particular and everyone in general. "It is mine a little," Maigret answered. He did not raise his voice. "Because you have been asking after tours. Because you have been telephoning hours as if they were streets. Because the trunk was light and is not. Because a girl has chosen a coat too big for her." Delcourt's hand slid to the hasp. He lifted the lid the way a man uncovers a plate he does not want. Under a folded shawl, the color of dust, lay a square wrapped in old flannel. He turned the flannel back. A grey metal box sat there, the paint rubbed white, at the corners where hands have learned it. There was a slot in the lid and a keyhole with a brass rim. It was the kind of box offices use when they do not have safes, but have wages. No one said anything. The porter made a small sound in his throat and shut his mouth on it. The little man drew in a breath through his nose and let it out through, his teeth as if the air had bits of glass in it. "Close it," Maigret said softly. He looked at the clerk behind the grill, and the clerk looked at him, and then at a point above his head where two beams met. The lid came down with the quiet, Of a room that has made up its mind. How much? He asked Delcourt, not because the amount mattered, but because putting a number in the air was like putting a chair under a tired man. "A week," Delcourt said, eyes on the rope handle. "Not even all of it. They will not be hungry. Only—" He stopped. He did not say quite what only. "Who wrote?" Maigret asked without turning his head. 4 o'clock, room at the back." He did not look at the little man. He let the question sit in the space between them, the way steam sits in a hall. Delcourt's face did a small thing that was not quite a wince. "He did," he said, and— the pronoun hung there like a coat on a nail. "He found the little difference at the office. He told me how it could be returned so that no one would be ashamed. He said if I made a fuss it would stain too many people. He called it discretion. He sent the key." His hand went to his ribs, then fell. "The first I threw away. I did not want this." The little man turned his head exactly a quarter and— then back. "It is better so," he said, and his voice had suddenly a country in it, something from a place with narrower streets. "No policemen, no wives, no girls, no— tours." He looked at Maigret and tried a smile that missed. "You like quiet endings, monsieur, so do I." "Do you?" Maigret's eyebrows lifted the smallest amount. "You have soft shoes for quiet, that is true, but you choose hours, you send boys, you stand under awnings and ask concierges about—" "Cathedrals." The little man's mouth twitched. "Tours has one cathedral," he said carefully. "As you know, Janvier had come close enough to be a smell of wet wool and tobacco. He did not speak. He looked at the box the way a fisherman looks at a net that has caught a boot and knows that there was a fish just before. Shall we go back?" Maigret asked nobody and everybody. "There are chairs there, coffee, a stove. It is better to be wrong in a lobby than to be right in a station." The porter bent without orders. The trunk came up between them again. The little man stepped back to let it pass and discovered he had nothing to do with his hands. He found his pockets dot back in the street. The light had lost its pewter and become tin. Shops were drawing their shutters an inch and then deciding against it. They walked at the same porter's pace, which lets a thought keep up. The little man kept 3 steps behind and 2 to the side, as if not to be counted with or without them. In the hotel, the bell did its best to make the moment ordinary. They set the trunk down by the stairs. The stove had kept its heat for them. Madame put 4 thick cups on the desk, because 2 would have been rude, and 3 would have taken. Besides, nobody drank. "It is not a crime to be afraid," Maigret said, looking at the man who had underlined words in blue ink. "It is not even a crime to be foolish. It is only that fear likes to look like order, and that is where it makes trouble." Delcourt sat because his knees had decided before his mind did. He put his hands on his hat, as if it were an animal that might jump. The little man remained standing, his soft shoes finding the quiet part of the tile. "We will wait," Maigret said. "You will tell me, one of you, where the number began. The day the sums stopped adding for themselves." He tapped the lid of the trunk with one finger, so lightly that it was almost a courtesy. "And for whom you were quiet?" No one answered at once. The little man looked at the tiles, then at his hands, then at Maigret as if the question were a coat he was not sure would fit him. "My name," he said finally, "is Rivette. I am with Pique Malencier, Rue Réaumur, internal accounts." He took a wallet from an inside pocket and showed a card as one shows a postage stamp, to be seen, not examined. "It is better when nothing is written," he added, almost apologetic. "A whisper is less cruel than a paper." Delcourt's fingers had begun to rub the hat brim until the felt made a tired sound. He lifted his eyes but not his head. "I was not stealing," he said, and the word looked too large in his mouth. "I was putting back what I had borrowed to put back what I had." He let it go. "Each time I replaced, there was always a little that had to be taken to tidy the figures. I told myself it would finish itself if I were careful. It did not. It grew like something in a jar in a cupboard. Odile, Maigret said without haste. He winced without moving. Not to give her things. To make a room where she would not have to be ashamed. To make a door that could close, that is all. He looked at the trunk. When she sent it, it was as if a room had come toward me. I thought, 1 week, and then another, and then it will be right. He swallowed. I knew room 14. We stayed once, my wife and I, when they did the paint in the kitchen, at the back. Quiet. 14 is a number I use when I do not want to think about numbers. I underlined it, because I wanted the room to take me in without asking questions. Rivette cleared his throat. The shortage is my business, he said evenly. I saw it, I followed it home, I'm not a policeman. I told him to put the money where it could be taken back without a door opening on a mess. I wrote 4 o'clock, because hours do not have eyes. I sent the key because he had lost the first. He glanced briefly at Maigret and then at the memory of the canal. This is not blackmail, it is... He searched his pockets for a word and did not find one. Prevention, he said finally with a tiny grimace. You put the box in the trunk? Maigret asked. Delcourt shook his head, quick, shamefaced. I did. The office door is a door like other doors when you have the key. I was going to bring it back the next day and say I had miscounted. I could not leave it in the room where I live. My wife counts drawers with her eyes without opening them. He looked at his hands. I thought in a hotel lobby a thing can be invisible because there are too many things. It is foolish. People think lobbies are stations, Madame said almost to herself. They are more like kitchens. No one smiled. The stove breathed. The porter did not move. Men who carry know when a load is not theirs to shift. Janvier rubbed at a spot on his sleeve as if he could polish the situation. If we take the box back, he said, the director will sit on it, and the men will think only that accounting is slow in September. No complaint, no procès-verbal. There will be no story to tell in the cafés. That is what you want, monsieur, he added to Rivette. Not unkindly. Rivette nodded. It keeps the weight where it belongs, he said, on the ones who have to carry it. And on the girl? Maigret asked. Delcourt's mouth opened and shut. She did not know, he said quickly. She thought... The breath left him. She thought the trunk meant a yes. He rubbed his forehead hard with the heel of his hand, as if there were numbers written there to be erased. I am a coward, he said with a simplicity that made Madame look away. I cannot, I am married. I told myself I would write and free her and free my wife, and then everything would stand by itself. It does not. It all sits on me and waits. The little collapse came then, not with tears but with a kind of undoing of posture. His shoulders lowered and widened, his hands fell open. He looked very tired and very young and older at the same time, as people do when they decide to stop balancing on a sentence. Maigret took his pipe from his pocket and did not light it. You will go back to your office, he said. You will. Stand in a hall where men laugh about football and smell of damp coats, and you will wait until someone calls your name. You will not make speeches. Mr. Rivette will return the box and will say the entry was mistaken and corrected. He will say nothing about rooms or trunks. He will perhaps mention a note in the ledger that made a figure look like another figure. He has the shoes for that. Rivette's face did a small wary thing and then settled. I can make a figure into another figure, he said. For the last time. To the men at the gate, Maigret continued, the week will be the same. Your wife will receive a letter you have already posted in a heavy envelope. Do not send her the ring in the second. She can give it back to you herself if that is what she decides. He waited until the pale mark on Delcourt's finger seemed to notice itself. You will not go to Odile's shop. You will not write. You will let her have the small room she has made without your help. She has learned to make do with drawers of buttons. She will do that one thing without you. Delcourt nodded twice as if the words were a curtain that had to be pulled across in 2 movements. "Will there be a paper?" he asked without looking up. "There will be a paper," Maigret said, "but not with your name on it. It will be a paper folded into a file about the Hôtel des Remparts and a trunk that was heavy when it should not have been. It will say the trunk was returned. That is all." He looked at Rivette. "In exchange, you will not play at policeman again. Leave it to those with boots that are not soft." Rivette gave a small rueful bow. "I prefer ours," he said. "They make less noise." Janvier lifted the lid. The flannel came back. The grey box looked up at them with the blank patience. "Of tin." He shut it again as if that were the last time they did not take the trunk to the station. They waited until the courtyard had taken a breath, and then carried it to a car. The porter in front, Janvier behind, Maigret walking beside, as one walks with a neighbour carrying a piece of furniture. Outside Rue Réaumur, a clerk with ink on. The side of his finger came down to open a door. There were no questions, that is a language of its own. When Maigret came back to the hotel, the stove was still warm. The lobby smelled of cabbage and damp wool, and the first faint sweet of coal. Odile stood just inside the door, her hands in her coat pockets because she had learned that hands give away more than faces. She looked at the place where the trunk had been, and then at Maigret, and did not ask. She nodded once to Madame, as people nod at a grave for someone they did not know well and liked anyway. "It will be returned to you," Maigret said. "Tomorrow. You will have to pay the man with the trolley the rest on Saturday as you promised." She smiled a little at that. "I would have in any case," she said. She looked at his pipe and then at his hat. He is where?" "Numbers are," Maigret said. "He will not come back." She breathed out, and it was not a sob, just a breath that had been held too long. "Then I will not either," she said quietly, and turned her collar up against a rain that had not started yet. She touched the door with her fingertips as if it were a friend, and went. Madame wiped the blotter with a cloth, as if erasing chalk. The husband folded his newspaper and unfolded it again without reading. The stove sighed, pleased with itself. In the evening, when the rain finally made up its mind and came down with the determination of a thing that has been putting itself off, Maigret climbed the stairs to the apartment where the smell of stew waited. Madame Maigret looked up from the table and saw at once that the knot he had carried had untied itself, if not in a beautiful bow, at least without breaking the string. 14, he said, taking off his coat. "You were right. People choose. Numbers the way they choose songs." She ladled and pushed the dish toward him. He ate a spoonful, then another, and reached for the beer he kept for days when the city had been itself all day. "They will not arrest him?" she asked, not curious, "only for the keeping of accounts between them." "No," he said. "He will be punished by those who have the talent for punishing without moving. It is heavier than prison sometimes." She nodded. "And the girl?" "We'll count buttons," he said. "She will make things even without a box." He sat, pipe unlit, looking at nothing for a time and at everything. The shape of the room that was his room because of 1,000 small obediences, the sound of the rain that made Paris remember it was Paris. Somewhere below, a radio played, a song that could have been 20 years old. A taxi passed in the street with its light shut. He thought of the trunk's rope handle, worn smooth by hands that had not meant it harm, of a key making a little arc and finding water, of an hour spoken like a street, of a girl who had learned the cost of a yes without having to pay it twice. When he went to the window, the plane trees were black as ink and the boulevard made its long, luminous slit. He did not have to think about anything. The city breathed, and he breathed with it.